The door closed. Not slammed, not pulled shut with force, just closed, quietly, the way a man closes a door when he knows what comes next matters. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the loudest thing in the room. After that, silence pressed down like a weight on everyone's chest. It was a small training hall in Foshan, southern China. The year was 1962. The walls were bare wood, aged and scarred from decades of fists and feet. The floor was worn smooth in the center, where countless students had practiced their forms. There were no mirrors, no posters, no trophies, just empty space and the smell of old sweat and incense. 6 people were in that room. 5 of them stood along the wall, backs straight, hands clasped behind them. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They had been told to come. They had been told to stay quiet. They understood this was not a lesson. This was something else. In the center of the room stood 2 men. I.P. Man was 59 years old. His hair was gray at the temples. His face was lined but calm, the kind of calm that comes from a lifetime of discipline. He wore a simple black Chung-shan, the traditional Chinese jacket buttoned to the collar. His hands hung loose at his sides. He was not a large man, 5'7", maybe 130 pounds, but when he stood still, he seemed to occupy more space than his body required. Bruce Lee was 21. He had returned to Hong Kong after years in America. He had studied philosophy, trained in different martial arts, absorbed everything he could find. He was lean and restless, always moving, always thinking. His body was wire-tight, every muscle defined. His eyes were sharp and hungry. He wore a plain white shirt and dark trousers, no shoes. Neither of them wore shoes. Bruce had asked for this meeting, not loudly, not with arrogance, but he had asked. He had come to his old teacher and said he wanted to test himself, to see how far he had come, to understand what he still needed to learn. I.P. Man had listened without expression. Then he had nodded once. He had chosen 5 students he trusted. He had told them to come at dawn. He had told them to tell no one. Now they were here. I.P. Man looked at Bruce for a long moment. His face gave nothing away. Then he spoke, his voice low and even. "Can you defeat me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. It was not a challenge, not an insult, just a question, simple, direct, the kind of question a teacher asks when he already knows the answer but wants the student to discover it themselves. Bruce did not answer immediately. He stood 3 meters away, his weight on the balls of his feet, his breathing steady. He knew what this was. This was not about pride, not about proving himself to the 5 men watching. This was about truth, the kind of truth that can only be found in combat. He bowed, a small bow, from the waist, eyes never leaving I.P. Man's face. "I would like to try, Sifu." I.P. Man returned the bow, smaller, almost imperceptible. Then his hands came up into the Wing Chun barred position, center line protected, elbows in, hands open and relaxed. He did not move his feet. Bruce shifted into his stance, modified Wing Chun, but different, wider, more mobile. His lead hand extended, fingers loose, his backhand chambered near his ribs. He began to circle slowly to his left. The 5 witnesses did not breathe. What happened next lasted perhaps 90 seconds, maybe less. Time became strange in that room. Later, each of the 5 would remember it differently, but certain moments would stay the same in every telling. Bruce moved first, a quick step forward, a probing jab toward I.P. Man's face, fast, crisp, the kind of strike that had surprised many opponents. I.P. Man's hand came up in a soft arc, deflecting it 3 inches to the left. No wasted motion. The jab passed harmlessly by his ear. Bruce adjusted. He feinted low, then snapped a kick toward I.P. Man's midsection. Again, fast, sharp.
But IP Man had already shifted his weight, turning his body just enough that the kick grazed his hip instead of landing clean. His hand came down, brushing the leg away. No aggression, no force, just redirection. Bruce pressed harder. He threw a combination: jab, cross, low kick, spinning back fist. His body moved like water, flowing from one technique to the next. Each strike was precise, technical, powerful. Any one of them could have ended a fight against a lesser opponent. But IP Man was not a lesser opponent. He moved like a man half his age. Every deflection was minimal. Every step was measured. He gave ground when he needed to, then took it back in the space between Bruce's breaths. His hands were always there, always in the way, always redirecting without clashing. He did not block. He did not counter. He simply made Bruce's attacks irrelevant. 30 seconds in, Bruce was breathing harder. Not from exhaustion, from focus, from the realization that nothing he threw was landing clean. IP Man's face remained calm. His breathing had not changed. Bruce changed tactics. He stopped trying to overwhelm. He slowed down. He began to feel for openings instead of creating them. He moved with more patience, testing IP Man's reactions, looking for patterns. IP Man let him try. Then, in a moment that seemed to arrive without warning, IP Man moved forward, one step, his lead hand extended in a straight punch aimed at Bruce's chest. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. Bruce saw it coming. He tried to deflect. His hand came up to redirect the strike, exactly as he had been taught years ago. But IP Man's hand was no longer there. It had changed angle mid-motion, slipping under Bruce's deflection. The knuckles touched Bruce's chest, just over his heart. Light contact, no force, just enough pressure to let him know it had arrived. Then IP Man's other hand was there too, and his leg had swept forward, hooking behind Bruce's ankle. Bruce felt his balance shift. He tried to recover, tried to reset, but IP Man's structure was already inside his, controlling his center, redirecting his weight. Bruce's back hit the floor. Not hard, not violent. He was lowered down in a way that felt almost gentle, the way you might guide a child who was learning to fall. But he was down, and IP Man was standing over him, one hand still extended toward his chest, fingers open, palm facing down. The room was silent. IP Man stepped back. He lowered his hands. His expression had not changed. Bruce lay on the floor for 2 seconds, staring at the ceiling. Then he rolled smoothly to his feet. His face was flushed, not from embarrassment, from understanding. He bowed again, deeper this time, held it longer. "Thank you, Sifu." IP Man nodded. He gestured toward the door. "You are fast. You are strong. You have learned much." Bruce waited. He knew there was more. "But you are still trying to win." The words landed heavier than any strike. "When you fight to win, you can be defeated. When you fight to understand, you become water. Water cannot be defeated. It finds the path. It does not force." Bruce stood still. Something in his chest tightened and then released. He had come here thinking he wanted to test his skill, but his teacher had given him something else. A mirror, a reflection of what he still lacked.
Ip Man walked to the door and opened it. Morning light spilled into the room. The 5 witnesses remained silent, watching. Bruce looked at each of them. Their faces were neutral. They had seen what they had seen. Nothing more, nothing less. As Bruce walked toward the door, Ip Man spoke once more. "You will be greater than me one day, but not because you are faster, because you will stop trying to be." Bruce paused in the doorway. He wanted to ask what that meant, but he already knew. The answer was not in words. It was in the feeling still echoing through his body.
the feeling of being completely controlled without ever being struck, the feeling of his own force being turned into emptiness. He bowed one final time and stepped into the morning air. The 5 witnesses left one by one, silent as they had been throughout. They were told never to speak of what they had seen. Some kept that promise for decades. Others told the story in whispers, late at night, to students they trusted. But all of them remembered the same thing. Not the techniques, not the speed or the power. They remembered the silence afterward. The way Bruce Lee stood in that doorway, a young man on the edge of greatness, facing the light with his teacher's words still settling into his bones. Ip Man closed the door. He walked back to the center of the room. He stood there alone for a long time, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes closed. He was not thinking about victory. He was not thinking about defeat. He was thinking about a young man who had the potential to change everything, if only he could learn to let go. Years later, Bruce would create Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, a philosophy built on the idea of formlessness, of adapting, of being like water. He would tell his students to absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is specifically their own. He would become a legend, an icon, a man whose name would be known across the world. But he would never forget that morning in Foshan. He would never forget the feeling of his back touching the floor, the gentleness of it, the certainty. He would never forget the question Ip Man had asked him, "Can you defeat me?" The answer, he realized much later, was not yes or no. The answer was understanding that defeat and victory were 2 sides of the same illusion. The real question was whether he could defeat himself, his ego, his need to prove, his attachment to outcome. That morning, with 5 silent witnesses and 1 patient teacher, Bruce Lee began to learn what it meant to be water. The door had closed, and when it opened again, he was different, not in body, not in technique, but in the space between his thoughts, in the silence before the strike, in the understanding that the greatest battles are not won with fists, they are won with surrender. Ip Man never spoke of that morning again. When asked about Bruce Lee in later years, he would smile slightly and say only that he had been a dedicated student, talented, driven, destined for great things. But the old master never told anyone about the question he had asked, about the 5 witnesses, about the 90 seconds that changed everything. Some truths are not meant to be shouted. Some lessons are not meant to be shared with everyone. They are whispered in closed rooms, passed from teacher to student, in moments that feel like silence but are actually everything. That morning in Foshan was one of those moments. Bruce Lee walked into that room as a young man trying to prove he had surpassed his teacher. He walked out as a student who finally understood what his teacher had been trying to show him all along. Not technique, not power, but the wisdom of yielding, the strength of emptiness, the victory found only in letting go.
The 5 people who witnessed it carried that secret for the rest of their lives. Some of them trained for decades more. Some of them became teachers themselves. But none of them ever forgot the sound of the door closing, the weight of the silence, the way 2 men stood in the center of an empty room and communicated in a language older than words. And none of them ever forgot what they learned that day. That true mastery looks like nothing at all, that the greatest teachers ask questions instead of giving answers, that defeat, when received with an open heart, is the most valuable gift a student can be given. The door closed, the question was asked, the answer was discovered,
And somewhere in that small room in Foshan, in the space between action and stillness, a legend began to understand what it meant to be human. Not invincible, not perfect, but willing to learn, willing to fall, willing to stand back up and bow deeper than before. That was the real lesson. That was what the 5 witnesses saw. That was what IP Man wanted Bruce to understand. And in the end, after the movies and the fame and the philosophy and the legend, that was what Bruce Lee carried with him. Not the memory of being taken down, but the memory of being lifted up by it. The memory of a teacher who cared enough to show him the truth, even when the truth was humbling, even when the truth hurt. That morning in Foshan, with 5 witnesses and 1 closed door, Bruce Lee learned what it meant to be defeated by love, by wisdom, by a master who knew that the only way to set a student free was to first show him his chains. IP Man asked, "Can you defeat me?" And Bruce Lee discovered that the answer did not matter. What mattered was that he had been brave enough to ask the question, humble enough to hear the answer, and wise enough, eventually, to understand that some victories can only be found in surrender. The door closed, and when it opened again, everything had changed. Not in the room, not in the walls or the floor or the morning light streaming through the window. The change was inside, invisible, profound. The kind of change that does not announce itself, but alters everything that comes after. 5 people witnessed it. They kept the secret. They honored the lesson. And decades later, when the world knew Bruce Lee as a legend, those 5 people would sometimes think back to that morning and smile quietly to themselves. Because they had seen something the world never would. They had seen the moment before the legend, the moment when potential met humility, when skill bowed to wisdom, when a young man fell and chose to learn from the falling. That was the real story. That was what happened when the door closed and the question was asked. That was the truth carried by 5 witnesses who understood that some moments are too sacred to be shared, too powerful to be explained, too important to be forgotten. IP Man asked Bruce Lee if he could be defeated, and in answering, Bruce Lee became who he was always meant to be. Not because he won, because he learned how to lose. Because he discovered that the greatest opponent is not standing in front of you, it is standing inside you, wearing your face, speaking with your voice, holding you back from becoming water. That morning, Bruce Lee met that opponent, and IP Man, with patience and precision and love, showed him the way through. The door closed, 5 people watched, 1 question was asked, and the answer changed everything.